Coffee.
Well, if no one's gonna drink this, maybe I'll just... Ugh, that's terrible. That's...
Good morning. This is Morning Coffee with the Chief. I am your host, Patrick Jordan, retired law enforcement, 38 years in law enforcement, also come from a family of law enforcement. On this show, we go over movies that are crime drama or police dramas, share our own experiences, and then talk about what is going on today in relationship to the movies. But today I have a great show lined up for you, and it's No Country for Old Men. But before we get into all of that, I really want to talk about the LA Mission. The Los Angeles Mission is a homeless shelter that provides services in Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles. Skid Row probably has the highest concentration of homeless people in any urban area, and certainly in Los Angeles. There's a great deal of addiction and mental health issues, and also just regular medical issues, and the the LA Mission provides basic services to the people who are unhoused or who are homeless in the area. They'll provide them a bed for the night if they want to get off the streets. They'll provide them a place to get a shower or some basic clothing. Two of the biggest things that are a really big deal for the homeless is if they can get some clean socks and clean underwear, which which the LA Mission provides. They also provide meals, 400,000 meals every year to the people on the streets of Skid Row in Los Angeles. And if these folks are ready to get off the streets, they provide wraparound services for 6 to 12 months. They'll treat their mental health issues. They'll treat their addiction issues. If they have any educational gaps that prevent them from getting hired, they'll focus on that. And they'll work on reintegrating them into society. I read a great article yesterday about cognitive behavioral therapy programs, how those are critical to getting people to off the streets. And the LA Mission provides that kind of therapy to the people who are ready to get off the street or to give up a life of crime. So the LA Mission gets no government funding. You can find the LA Mission at losangelesmission.org. Again, losangelesmission.org. You know, a donation of $25, $50, $100, it will help so many people. Do a good deed for today. Bring up the Los Angeles Mission at losangelesmission.org and make a donation. You know, and before I bring on my guests and my show, I really want to talk about, I've been getting some feedback, and people say, hey, I don't have 2 hours to watch a show. And my son, I had breakfast with him for Father's Day. He says, I like listening to the show versus watching it. And there are usually a bunch of old grizzled police officers on the show. So actually listening while you're commuting or bringing it up while doing your laundry or doing your dishes is a great time to listen to the show. That's what I do when I do a quality control check. I'll do my show and then I'll listen to it as I cook breakfast or do something else like that. So anyways, there are more than one way to monitor the show. You can find it on Pop Culture Minefield, the YouTube channel, Pop Culture Minefield, Morning Coffee with the Chief, every Tuesday at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. You can also find it on Rumble on the KGRA channel on Rumble. It stays about a week on Rumble, and then it goes behind a paid wall. YouTube, you can find all on Pop Culture Minefield. You can find all of my shows by just Googling in the YouTube search engine, Pop Culture Minefield Chief. If you just put that in the Google line, all of my shows will come up. You know, I do want to announce the next couple of weeks' shows because I think they're pretty important, or the next shows I'm going to do. So I'm going to do a tribute to Treat Williams next week and do Prince of the City. If you haven't seen it, it's a great New York police drama, and it's based upon a true story. But I thought Treat Williams was a fantastic actor, particularly in that show, and I really want to do it. And I got a couple guys who were born and raised in New York that have come on as guests for that show. But today's show is No Country for Old Men, and let me bring up my guest, and then I'll introduce the movie itself. The first guest, he's been here before, is Matt Rodriguez, a retired chief from Santa Paula Police Department and also retired captain from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. He was a candidate for sheriff in the last primary, didn't make it. He was the lone conservative speaking the truths about what we need to do about crime. Well, everybody else was too busy talking about holding cops accountable. But Matt broke that narrative and started talking about what was really going on, and that helped bring some of the candidates to the center. Matt's working on a project where he's developing housing for homeless, and I think it's still a homeless vets housing. Hey, Matt, welcome to the show. Are you still working on that project?
Yes, actually, we are. We've made a lot of progress on that in the Pasadena area. I spent some time over the last couple of weeks downtown and near the Union Rescue Mission and toured that operation, which is much like the LA Mission, a nonprofit, and doing a lot of great work. It's unbelievable what they're doing down there. I mean, they have 700, 800 people that they've taken off the streets and get them, the medical care they need, the dental care they need, and get them taken care of. So we're doing work in that area as well, but we're focused on veterans of the United States military. They need a lot of help, and there's a lot of homeless veterans as well. So anybody who's out there that feels that they could donate to any veterans organizations, that's helpful for them. I've gotten to know plenty of those guys actually over the last year and a half, and some of their stories are tough and they're hard, but they're persevering. They're soldiers and warriors and patriots. So it's been rewarding from that perspective. But yep, thanks for having me on again, Pat, and great to see John.
Yes, well, one, I'm glad you're working on that project still, and I hope it gets legs and you're able to get that thing up and running, and that you're working in the homeless genre. You're doing something to help. I enjoy my time working with the LA Mission and doing what I can. So I'm gonna hopefully do a telethon or something on this show, or do something on this channel for the LA Mission, and I'll invite you on. You can talk about your project. And so my next guest is going to be Dr. John Sullivan. Now, Dr. John Sullivan also retired from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department as a lieutenant. And, I always bring on some great guests who got afterlives after the Sheriff's Department or after law enforcement. Now, John, in addition to being a 30-plus year veteran of law enforcement, has always been an academic. And I think Matt and I can selfishly say that we tapped into John whenever we could to deal with some problems or go in a different direction when we were doing transit policing or dealing with terrorism. John helped set up the Joint Terrorism Task Force in Los Angeles, and he also has a strong background in transit policing. I'm hoping to get him on when I do Pelham 123, the first and the second versions, because he's from New York, as well as you'll listen to his accent. And he's also written several books on terrorism and today's subject, Mexican drug cartels. He wrote his dissertation on it, and so that's really why I wanted to have him on for this movie, No Country for Old Men. Hey, John, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Pat. It's good to see you on social media. Hey, Matt, it's good to see you. I'm glad to be here. I look forward to discussing the situation. In fact, I just got back from Brownsville down in the Rio Grande Valley. Was down in Brownsville and McAllen doing a threat assessment for the Port of Brownsville. So got to see firsthand some of the issues going on the border down there.
I was doing a little bit of research, and I saw the sheriff for Terrell County. DeSantis did a kind of a political dog and pony show down there at the border, and he brought some sheriffs together, and they all talked about the border. And can you put up Terrell County there, Martin, so we can see where it's at? And might as well give some background before I introduce the show. But Terrell County is right on the border, and this is where the movie is set in. It's interesting. I think it's considered West Texas. You can take that down, Martine. And the interesting thing about Terrell County is it's got less than 800 residents. It's 2,300 square miles, and it's got 800 residents. I read that. I go, that must be a typo or something. So I looked at a couple different sources, and when the show happened, when the time period for the show, they had like 600 residents. So I mean, it's a very low density, low population. I can see why it might be an easy place to do some smuggling. I mean, they don't have roads there, but probably, but it just that's what the border's like. And this sheriff was saying, hey, you know what, the wall is great, but we still need staff. Still need some of the other infrastructure to keep the border safe. So, what do you think, John?
Well, the border zone is very complicated. I mean, Texas is one of the U.S. states on the border, and it borders Tamaulipas, a little bit of Nuevo Leon, Coahuila, Chihuahua. But you also have border rolling into New Mexico, Arizona, and California, and each part of the border is unique. For example, the Rio Grande Valley has a culture that is unique to itself. In fact, at one point in history, there was a Republic of the Rio Grande, a separate state, and Texas was once, as we know, part of Mexico. The border is some architects who look at geospatial information call the U.S.-Mexico frontier the hyperborder because of the high degree of connectivity on both sides. And when the first thing I noticed when I got down into Cameron County, which is obviously east of the area we're talking about in West Texas, and I had been previously did field work in El Paso, Las Cruces, and Ciudad Juarez and the Juarez Valley. I got out there. First thing I noticed is there's incredible economic connectivity between the U.S. and Mexico on the illicit side of the border. There are tanker trucks moving through Harlingen, which is about 20 miles roughly from Brownsville. Brownsville is a port. It's a growing port that moves a lot of petroleum into the area, and the tanker trucks deliver condensate, so like naphtha and processed diesel, processed gasoline over into Mexico, and the tank trucks are like a never-ending movement. The area is on the approach there. I drove down from San Diego. People were like, "Make sure you get gas because the last 60 miles there ain't none." And you get down there and you drive flat, straight, no turn for like 100 miles. And during the day you see cattle, and at night you only see the burning from the oil fields. Incredibly complex. The economies are tied. Some people think a third of the economy of the U.S., a third of the economy of Mexico are tied into that border zone. So
Wow.
We need to look at it very carefully. There are lots of borders need to be controlled, but borders are gateways for culture, the economy, and unfortunately crime. And there's significant cross-border movement. Not all the immigrants coming across are criminals. Most of the criminals are exploited by most of the migrants, refugees in some cases, or economic migrants in other cases, are exploited by criminal enterprises. What we call Mexican cartels, and some people call them drug trafficking organizations, but they're not really drug trafficking organizations per se. They're actually poly-crime organizations engaged in lots of crime, and extortion is probably like any mafia type organization is probably their biggest, line of business, if you will. I mentioned the petroleum. There's they call it as huachicolero, which is an illicit trade in petroleum. They're illegal taps into the Pemex type pipelines.
Yeah.
In this case, with the condensate, they'll take the naphtha down to Mexico. They'll mix it into a shipment of gasoline, and then we're talking cartels and related criminal gangs, and they'll force the independent gas stations to purchase it because Mexico deregulated its Pemex and allowed other oil companies to come in. So very, very complex. Violence is what we talk about. And I'll just say it up front, and we're going to talk about violence in the movie, but the real issue is much more subtle. It's corruption and impunity. And
Well, so let's so my guest just got a built introduction of why Matt and I really like John, because when you get him going on a subject, you just kind of pick out, oh, I think I want to deal with this, I want to do that, and so John, where can they find your material? You've got a dozen books published. Where can they find your stuff?
Well, yeah, I've got about a dozen books on Mexico. I think I've got like over 20 books in total. The easiest way is to go to my Amazon website, which has about 2/3, 7/8 of the books I've published, starting from, on this topic, Mexico's criminal insurgency. I'm kind of the framer of that theoretical frame. Of another book on strategic notes on third generation gangs. I'm the founder of that theory as well. A couple cool books that I think are very current right now. I did a book on criminal drone evolution, looking at how Mexican drug cartels weaponized commercial off-the-shelf drones as tools for surveillance, intelligence surveillance and reconnaissance, and they use those at the border to see where Customs and Border Protection and the Border Patrol are, and then they'll move the other way. But they also use them to attack each other. For example, the Sinaloa cartel just entered the fray and attacked the cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, or the CJNG, last month. They will use them to attack Mexican military, Sedena forces, as well as Semar forces, with grenades attached to the drone. They drive them up and move them
Just like we're seeing in Ukraine, right?
Well,
and so
exactly, predating Ukraine, but Ukraine's key because in Ukraine they put the weaponization process on steroids, and in a year, the crude drones have become much more sophisticated, and that tradecraft travels worldwide. So you're seeing criminals use drones not only along the border. They started along the border doing smuggling and surveillance, and now they're using them to attack. A couple of years ago in Tecate, in Baja California, a cartel believed to be the CJNG brought a drone into the backyard of the head of the state public safety organization. It had a couple grenades attached, but they weren't. They were inert. But there was a threat communication on board that said, "Hey, get with it, or we're going to come get you with the real one." Basically, I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, drones are part of the mix. That's one of the books. Another book we did looked at the rise of Mexico as a narco state. And there are people that don't like to hear that. I can tell you, I talk every week to people in the political elite of all parties in Mexico City, and they don't like that description. But as an academic, I put them out to challenge people's thought and to look at how we might be able to better, serve the situation. And quite frankly, there are parts of Mexico that Mexico is not a failed state. Mexico itself is not a narco state, but there are pockets, criminal enclaves, and many of them are along the border. Like Tamaulipas is a high degree of corruption. Tamaulipas is one of the states bordering Texas, for example. When I went to Juarez several years ago, Juarez at that time was the most violent city in the world. And large portions of the border frontage on the Mexican side were depopulated intentionally by the cartels so they could control the territory to move product across the border. And I'll tell you what, we're driving. I was with a colleague and a journalist from El Paso, and we're driving through the Juarez Valley. We're about 40, 50 miles east of Juarez itself, where downtown Juarez at that time was decimated. There's new areas where there are big, large mansions. Remind me of New York, the mafia mansions, right? And it was clear there was a lot of money there. We got out there after about the third Pemex station we traveled through, and each Pemex station will have a halcón or a lookout for the cartels. Large SUV vehicles start trailing you, coming up past you. And then fortunately we ran into a Mexican army, a legitimate Mexican army, checkpoints, and we were able to lose the cartel guys or the sicarios working for the cartels.
Well, that brings up. So I did the movie Sicario, John, and I would have loved to have you on that, but you weren't available, and we were able to get into the what's going on at the border today. But this movie, so let me introduce the movie, and this is No Country for Old Men. It's actually set in 1980, so that's when we started. So it's a different time at the border, but many of the problems we have now were going on then. It just seems like it's just on steroids now. And you're right. They've always been involved in multiple different kinds of crimes. And I think this one is more about heroin, although they did do cocaine and were doing methamphetamine at the time. But a lot of this stuff expanded as Mexico took over the primary smuggling for cocaine and now fentanyl, for that matter. But this movie was released in 2007. It's a neo-Western crime thriller, which basically just means it's a new type of Western. It was directed by Joel and Ethan Coen, who did the great movie Fargo. They've done some other, Raising Arizona as well, some really good movies. And it stars Tommy Lee Jones, who I really like as an actor, Javier Bardem. Did I say that right, John? Bardem, Barden.
Yeah, Bardem. Yeah,
yeah, and he plays Anton Chigurh, the hitman. And I'm going to ask, but he got an Academy Award for this. And then Josh Brolin, who we just did. I did a movie with him, but I'm going to do another one. I just talked about doing Gangster Squad. I found somebody whose dad and grandfather were on the original LAPD Gangster Squad, so I'm going to do the Gang Squad for LAPD with Josh Brolin soon. But this is based in West Texas in 1980, and it's the main characters are Llewellyn Moss. It's Brolin, a Vietnam veteran who ends up stumbling on some money and then tries to keep it, and the cartels are after him. And then the hitman, Anton Chigurh, which is Bardman, who is pursuing him, who's a psychopath, and we'll get into that in a little bit. And then Tommy Lee Jones, who plays the sheriff, Tom Bell, for Terrell County, which, again, it's just amazing me that they less than 800 people in that county. So, Matt, did you watch the movie, and what did you think of the movie?
I did watch the movie, and it was interesting. It brought back some memories. I mean, I don't have a lot of experience like John down there on the border of Mexico, but I did travel one time while working for you, Pat, to New Mexico, and went out to Albuquerque, and then went to Socorro, New Mexico, and to the Energetic Materials Research Testing Facility. You remember that? You could send bomb class, and they would put us in a class all day, and then we'd blow things up in the evening. But it just struck me when I saw the movie. I was like, wow, these people that live, they're born and raised pretty simple lives out there, like you said, 700-800 people in a widespread geographic area. That's what I saw when I went to Socorro, New Mexico, and I was, hey, I've been a city slicker my whole life, born and raised here in Los Angeles, Southern California. And you just go, wow, how do people live like this? And it it's not a knock on them. That's where they're born and raised, and I'm sure they love it. But that just was not for me. I remember driving through there. And when I saw the movie, they're very wholesome places, and I could see the problems of a wholesome place, people living there for decades, working at the filling station or the local market, and all of a sudden here comes your friends, the cartels, with truckloads of heroin or methamphetamine, cocaine, and guns and violence to come with it. So it struck me as something I witnessed a little bit during my career. In 1980, that was the beginning of the cocaine tsunami that came our way from South Central America and Mexico. So, but I thought the movie was it was well done. I thought it was very well done. The story was interesting, with a psychopath involved, but I thought they did a great job in the cinematography and the landscape.
Well, they did actually win. They won Best Picture, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, and then the Best Supporting Actor with Anton Chigurh. So it was well received by a lot of different folks. John, did you like the movie?
Yeah, I thought it was outstanding. I thought it was kind of, in a way, eerie and when you watch it, you see why, and it brings you that kind of quiet calm that precedes mayhem. I think it was really, as a, the genre of a film, I think it was a cross between a Western and film noir. It doesn't really fit in either, but it has components of both. And I thought, I mean, you mentioned the key players, and Tommy Lee Jones did excellent. And by the way, in the film, he's like you and Matt, he come from a law enforcement family with a legacy of law enforcement. He was a sheriff. His grandfather before him was a sheriff, and his uncle, who he speaks to at the end, ties it all together in a strange way. Another great actor in this movie who did a very small part, but really exposed that corruption piece I mentioned, where you see legitimate government, a legitimate business intersecting with the illicit economy, was Woody Harrelson.
Yes.
Who did, I mean, small, quiet, measured, fit really well in the film. I think when you look out there and you see the vast, unsettled area, the rural areas, it gives you a feel for how large an area we're talking about, and how it becomes hard to control that type of territory.
Well, that's why, when we talk about border security, and I knew this would come up, and I'll give you just a couple minutes to talk about, John, but you did say something on Twitter today that I'll hit you up on, and then just give me a couple of issues we can do on the border to improve it. But you said we shouldn't be labeling Mexican drug cartels terrorist organizations, and I understand where you're coming from. I think you dilute the issue of terrorism and by naming everybody terrorists, but I also recognize that they're attempting to control the Mexican government through violence and terror. Yeah. So I mean, just explain that briefly.
First, that tweet, I retweeted somebody else's tweet. And when I tweet, that doesn't necessarily mean I agree, although in this case I do. I tweet for context on both sides of the issue so we can have debate. Now, the reason I don't think, and I've briefed this inside the U.S. government, and I've briefed it academically, the reason I don't think characterizing Mexican drug cartels as terrorists it has several facets. I do think in many cases they are criminal insurgents, and they are waging an insurgency, not to take over the government, but insurgency in a criminal insurgency framework, which I developed as a theory. What happens is the cartels change the nature of governance. They hollow out the state, and then they change the relationships between the state, the people, and organized crime. And in some cases, if you look at theory, they could be ushering in an era of state transition, which may or not be bad, because sometimes it may be good, it may be bad. When you take on the responsibility of governance, and cartels in some places like Tamaulipas and Jalisco, in fact, have, and certainly in Sinaloa with the Pacific cartel or the Sinaloa cartel, have certainly supplanted government to some degree. When they do that, they take on responsibility. So you've seen groups like the Zetas in the past, which were like as brutal, maybe more brutal than the current CJNG. And when there were hurricanes, they provided humanitarian relief. Why? Because they will require the population where they live to see them as legitimate, so they don't interfere. Why I don't think we need to designate them as terrorists. One is, we already have all the legal mechanisms that come by designating them as transnational criminal organizations that occur when you make them terrorists. So in one case, it's virtue signaling by people saying we're going to call them terrorists because terrorists are evil. Well, you know what? In the 19th century, they did that with a group of people they then called anarchists.
Yeah.
Remember Sacco and Vanzetti? And they called everybody that they didn't agree with anarchists. So the term became diluted. It meant nothing. Now, when people say they're terrorists, they're not talking about do they meet the legal, and there's not a single legal framework, which makes it difficult. They don't meet necessarily the U.S. definitions, or they meet part of them, because they definitely have a political component. But it's like with David Kilcullen, who's a retired Australian army officer who became pivotal in the coalition provisional authority during the Iraq War, he coined the term accidental guerrillas. Well, these cartels are accidental insurgents. Yes, they have a political component. They corrupt local government the most, state level government next, and some states are thoroughly permeated with corruption, and some national feel.
So we are saying, let's not dilute the issues of terrorism by calling everybody terrorism. You said it basically, genuflecting, for political correctness or whatever, however you said that, and I agree with that. When I read it, I go, well, I understand where John's coming from on this because I actually agree with that. I mean, because we have broadened the definition of terrorism. When we were fighting terrorism, we had a very clear what we wanted to focus on, and those were people overseas who had conducted the 9/11 attack and the attack in Madrid and the attack in London and all those other places where they had done successful attacks. They were a real threat to us. But now we label everybody a terrorism for funding reasons and other things. So
it becomes hard to craft public policies, hard to craft enforcement.
Yes.
And if and believe me, we want to win, but I believe we have the legal authority under existing law in many cases. That doesn't mean we don't need to adapt things. For example, on the use of drones. Well, that's brand new. That's novel. There's new law needed there. But, I think it's easy to say they're terrorists. I don't like them. I got that. But we need to be more precise to solve the problem. And that.
Okay.
Yeah,
let's bring up John, I got to bring up a scene here. I know I really want to get your opinion on this. And I got it under control, Martin. And so in this scene, it's the deputy sheriff has made an arrest of Shigur, right? The assassin, the hitman who's been hired. So basically what has happened is we don't know it yet, but this hitman's been hired to retrieve some money back on a drug deal gone bad. And this deputy sheriff unknowingly arrests him. And now you watch the scene go on. He's on the phone, probably talking to the sheriff. I guess he's probably in another county where they got like 3 people on duty, right? And you just watch behind the scene quietly. Now, I don't know how practical it is that you don't hear somebody sitting on the ground and then slipping their handcuffs forward and then coming from behind you to garrote you from behind. But it is a very intense scene, and just the whole thing where they show his cowboy boots scuffing up trying to get some traction, to get some leverage on the hitman here. But it's brutal. Matt, what did you think of this scene?
I think it was real life is what I think. I think, in Hollywood, they, try to paint a picture that, this is a real atrocious act and violent, but we've all seen it in real life. I mean, we worked in the county jail where there are people as vicious as this Shigur guy. And, while I was working in the county jail in Los Angeles, we had, Mexican mafia members kill other, inmates in a violent manner, as violent as that act right there, and while handcuffed. So I just saw it as a brutal, terrible, unfortunate situation for this deputy and his family in the movie. But I also know in real life there are people that have that within them to be able to take someone's life like that, cold, callous, and calculated, without any thought, whatsoever afterwards. No conscious psychopath type, people in this world. And Shigur is just unfortunately, a symbol of what we have lurking around us sometimes.
And this guy, he goes on to, he kills a deputy, steals the car, and then he ends up pulling somebody over, killing that guy, and taking his car. But I was just watching. Oh my God, how could he put the guy on a seat behind him? How come he's not in a cell? But you know what? We come from the largest sheriff's department in the country. We had different lessons and different things that we had to do. And I have to remind myself, this is, the 70s, and this was supposed to be 1980. So we learn a lot of lessons from people who lose their lives. We develop best practices. So putting this guy behind him, not having a handcuff to something probably wouldn't have happened with us.
Pat, if you see any sort of YouTube videos or body cam stuff that they post online. We've been saying this for decades. Like the tactics in other parts of the country aren't quite what we're used to because we deal with so many more people. So yeah,
Yes.
I'm surprised to see the suspect behind the deputy in handcuffs, and it's just the way sometimes the practices are done in those parts of the country. But unfortunately, ended up in tragedy.
So, John, the evilness of this guy, and we're going to see it throughout the film. There are hitmen in Mexico that are like this. They're evil. Can you give me an example of somebody that, maybe this guy reminded you of?
Well, he reminds me of personally one MA Mexican Mafia shot caller I interviewed, and the common thing there was the vacant lack of empathy, the casual murder. And I won't mention who that is or how I got there. But their sicarios or hitmen are part of the Mexican cartel and gang scene. And cartels are often combines of multiple independent gangs. Just like when we talk about gangs in Los Angeles, there's multiple cliques underneath the gang. Well, cartels, similar to the Mexican mafia, are umbrellas with lots of pieces. And there are lots of truly scary people engaged in this across the border. Juarez was known for sicarios becoming violent. Often their violence comes in two varieties, broadly speaking, and it can be subdivided further. You have instrumental violence, like I'm taking out my rival because it's good for me, and then you have symbolic violence where you commit atrocity just to be able to project the fact that you have power.
Yes.
I think there's a in between, because people would say that violence by a cartel, particularly targeting the government, is bad for their business, and there are conditions for why you do. Usually, cartels avoid confronting government, so killing a deputy would be rare. If they can't avoid the government, they corrupt the government. There's ample evidence of cartels being able to corrupt the government. The mix between the violently confronting, which is the next step, because if you can't use corruption, you violently corrupt. The mix comes where you have what they call the plato plomo, it's a silver or lead. Now you can go, and I've heard them on the tape down at Tijuana right before the cartels conduct an attack, and they'll get on the radio and they'll know the police call sign. They'll call out to the cops. And remember, Tijuana's got a fairly large police signature at the municipal level, and the Baja State is large. And they'll get there and they'll say, Unit 23, how you doing, Jose? I'm paraphrasing, putting it in English. How's your daughter, Anita? And don't you live on this street? It would be really sad if something happens. Right before they go, that eerie silence. When the Mexican drug war kicked off, the reason it kicked off, it starts back in about 96 is when most people say it occurred, like December 96 it starts. I believe that there are antecedents. That's when Felipe Calderon came in, and he just said at that time that Michoacan, the state he came from, was not under control, and he needed to impose himself. Prior to that, under Vicente Fox, there was ample evidence that it was moving in that direction. And in fact, you can go earlier into the earlier history. But what the sicarios did in Michoacan, in one particular case, La Familia Michoacana, which is interesting because they operate in California, they operate at times in Los Angeles. They walk into a nightclub, Solis Sombra, like so, the sun and shade, like after a bullfight, right, where the seating are. They go up on the alcove. They call out and they say, La Familia is here, and they open up a burlap bag and throw 3 decapitated heads on the ground to show they were in charge. That's an example, and that's tame level of brutality.
That's evil, and that's what this guy, because I do think that part of his, they said, oh, you got to stay away from Shigur, he's crazy, and the people are scared of him, but that's it helps him get his job done, right? I guess it's instrumental violence, right? And both symbolic and instrumental, but it's all leading towards a goal. And so let's bring up the next scene because and this is the blood. I call it the bloodbath. So this is where Josh Brolin stumbles upon this drug deal that's gone bad, and everybody has been killed, or one guy's alive, and it's a drug deal. And as I watched the movie, I was like, I wasn't sure what drug they were talking about at first, but this is a heroin, I believe, is what they're dealing here. And so basically, you got the people with the drugs and the people with the money. They shot it out. One guy manages to get the money, and Llewellyn tracks him down and gets that. Llewellyn Moss is the name of the character. Tracks him down and gets the money, and he decides he's going to keep it. And I like the character. He's a former Marine, went to Vietnam, and he's not really intimidated by these guys. And he decides he's going to steal the money, which really starts the whole process. So a couple questions here. Well, Matt, what'd you think of the scene? What'd you think of this situation?
I thought it was interesting. It started out with him. He was hunting, actually. And I'm not sure what kind of animal that was, some sort of a desert elk or something. But he was hunting. And then, when he shot and wounded the animal, he walked down there, and then he saw the dog limping, which led him to the slaughter. And it was interesting because I was reading some reviews, and if you go on Wikipedia, you can read a little bit about the movie. And one of the angles on it is where they say that the hunters become the hunted in this movie. So that was actually kind of an interesting dynamic that I read about after. I didn't pick up on it during the movie, but it's interesting to read the reviews and how they interpret these movies. But that was an interesting part. But I think it's par for the course for this cartel work. Obviously, I'm not an expert on this as John is. I've had many conversations with John, and he's given me many of his books. But I know that this happens in real life, and there are slaughters like this and mass graves throughout these areas, and it's real life.
Well, before we get some comments from John, let's bring up the next scene going back. So Llewellyn Moss, he takes the money. I believe he thinks he covers his tracks so that they can't find him, right? And he goes home, he stashes the money, and he takes some of the weapons also from this scene. And he knows that this is not people are gonna be pursuing him. So he does the best he can as a hunter can to cover his tracks. But he feels guilty because one of the guys was alive. He asked for water, and this really tells us this is the difference between Anton Chigurh and Llewellyn Moss is he didn't give him any water at the time. I don't have any water, and he can't sleep. He decides to get some water and go out there and give this guy some water. And then, of course, he finds that he's dead. And there are other gangsters there. They've already got the dope. Now they realize Llewellyn is probably the guy that took the money, and that's when the pursuit starts. So, John, I have one couple questions. So the first one is, it's probably not rare at all that we have deals going on across the border in these barren counties like Tedderell County or some of the other ones in West Texas or elsewhere along the border, right? So this is maybe the shootout is unusual, but it's here on this side of the border. It's not unusual in Mexico, right? So you think the scene's realistic, and do you think it's likely that we're having these kinds of exchanges in the U.S. or at least in the 80s?
Well, I think, and that's one of the closing themes of the movie, that there's continuity. None of this is actually new. Were there drug battles cross-border in the 80s? Yes. Were there in the 90s? Yes. The 2000s, 2010s? Yes. Most of the action cartel on cartel occurs in Mexico. In fact, those SUVs are realistic. Update them. The trucks are bigger now. The SUVs are bigger now. The wheels are more exotic. They still exist. They're out there. The difference now is that they're often armor plated, bulletproof, blindados, they call them. In some cases in Mexico, they're full improvised artisanal, what they call narco tanks, but they're really like improvised armored fighting vehicles, or and you'll see cartel versus cartel with artisanal armored vehicles. They'll build them on the chassis of a like a dump truck or a cement mixer, and they'll be armored. And then some of them are now starting to get turrets, and they'll mount large 30 or 50 caliber machine guns on them, and they'll go in mass and attack each other. In fact, on the cover of one of my books, we see a cartel armored vehicle, and they're using the drone above to provide cover. So now you're getting kind of combined arms.
That's integrated, combined. So my second question then, John, is the pursuit. You know, is there a cost to doing business where they say, I got ripped off, that's the cost to do business? I would rather not commit this violence, because they sent Chigurh, and Chigurh is just cutting a path of just death and destruction just to get this $2 million or $2+ million back.
I don't think that's realistic, other than it has an art, from an artistic point of view, it shows the depth and depravity and the challenge. And I think that's there. Like I mentioned before, criminal enterprises seek to avoid contact with law enforcement, not bring us on, unless, it meets their necessary interests, or unless sometimes there's a emotive capacity. Because I often, when I was doing my field work down there, was like, well, why will they attack us? Because they can just pay us. And they do pay off cops in Texas. They pay off county judges, which is like the head of the board of supervisors here in California. They pay them off. It's well known. But it's a good artistic hook into showing, one person can show it all. So is that character real? Kind of. Would he do it that way? Not necessarily.
Yeah, but you're right. It makes for a good book, and it makes for a good. Oh, and this is based upon a book on the same name. So if you want to read the book, go back and read the book. But the next scene I want to bring up, Matt, and I want to hit you up on this, and because this was really a big deal in the movie. It was one of those scenes that everybody talked about, and this is the clerk in the gas station. Chigurh ends up there, and I forget, he's getting some gas, and this conversation and the flipping of the coin thing. And it was really interesting how people talked about that Chigurh, the assassin, kind of used this coin flip as a way to say that the fact that he wants to kill this guy, or is thinking about kill this guy, it absolves him, because it's really about the fate of a flip of a coin that is deciding whether this guy lives or dies. And in reality, it's his decision whether he lives to die. Now, John talked about instrumental versus symbolic. There really is no reason for him to kill this guy, but they go through this whole conversation about whether he's going to flip a coin, and what's the most you bet on a flip of a coin. What'd you think of this scene?
Oh, I thought it was incredible. It was suspenseful, and it was stressful. And it was just another example of, like I said earlier, you got the wholesome life. The man tells him where he came from. He's been there his whole life. He lives there with his wife, and, raised, family in the area. And then he comes across this guy that is obvious to him that something's not right about this guy. He makes him feel very uncomfortable. The guy just wants to close the store down and go home. And he can see that the sugar guy has got some serious issues, and he has to make a decision on whether it heads or tails. And as you know, he picks the right side to save his own life. But it was very stressful, and to me, it's just another example of this hitman actually causing a bit more stress and a bit more pain to the proposed victim, because he's got to make the right choice. So it's even more stress on the potential victim. And I thought it was just a great way for the producers to show the level of sickness that this hitman has, and because it's just, again, like, it's just forcing the pressure on the victim to his fate lies in the hand of a coin toss, and it's very stressful, and it's disturbing in a lot of ways.
Before I get your comments on this scene, John, I want to bring up the scene with with the sheriff. He goes out to the scene, obviously, and he's got to investigate this. I can't imagine how big his department if he's only got about 800 people in the county, or at that time 600 people. Yet he's investigating, right? I would think that the DEA or feds would jump in on this case, but for the movie, he's the guy that's got the handle. It technically would be a local handle, and he goes out there and I got a couple of Martin, can you show the article? First of all, show the scene and then put up the article on intelligence from the DEA in the 70s. I think I sent you that, John, and then some the thing from Brookings. I think the Brookings Institute talked about it as well. So back in the 70s, I'm not sure, but it seemed to me the dominant drug coming across was probably heroin at the time. I remember Mexican brown is what we used to call it when we arrested people on the street, right? Heroin was a big deal in New York at the time. You were still in New York, right? That was probably coming from Asia, but that's what was going on at the time. And the drug of choice changes, but the smuggling routes are the same. So this sheriff is tested. He knows that this is what's going on in his county. Can you speak to maybe just a brief history of what was going on in the 70s in terms of smuggling narcotics? I don't know if your research went back that far across the border.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing I'll point out, when you get back to the 70s, remember Miami Vice, the TV show?
Yeah.
A lot of the smuggling was in the Caribbean on maritime routes. And that was severely interdicted. So what we're going to see here is what they call the balloon effect. You push the balloon and it just moves. You take action, you move it in, and it spreads it out. So DEA, together with its partner agencies, obviously local law enforcement, was able to put a real hurt on the maritime route. So they moved to the cross-border route, which, is kind of constrained because there's only a few really good border crossings across, the Twin Cities, usually along the border, like Calexico, Mexicali, Tijuana, San Diego, Juarez, El Paso, etc. And most of the drugs move through those, customs checkpoints. And what they'll do is they'll try to get a diversion, or they'll pay off the customs officers and they'll move through. There's a high degree of reported corruption within Customs and Border Protection, and has been for years. Some of the movement comes across the rural areas. I mentioned in parts of Chihuahua, which are a little further east from where we're talking. Well, yeah.
But did they basically adapt the old heroin routes for cocaine?
The routes are the routes. The commodity doesn't matter. I would argue that it's old heroin routes, but it's even before that, because marijuana trade was there before. Marijuana trade in the 19th century was prevalent. And one of the things we talk about now, the flow of fentanyl into Mexico. Ensenada was a hub for drug trafficking in the 19th century. Mexican organized crime groups have been there. I mean, Asian organized crime groups have been in Mexico working with the predecessors to the current Mexican crime groups, back to the 19th century. So yes, they do use the old routes. Commodities change, and it's not just drugs they move across. They move other things. They obviously, the cartels are now getting involved in the movement of people, which in the past they just took a tax. Now they're directly interfering, but they move other clandestine commodities. I mentioned the petroleum across the border. The U.S. District Court in Houston has prosecuted numerous cases on cross-border illicit petroleum trade. They move electronics and a lot of other goods. So yes, they're engaged in a bunch. Right now, though, the two drugs, I think, or three drugs start to become looking important. The precursors for fentanyl and fentanyl itself, or other synthetic drugs, precursors for methamphetamine. It's cocaine, because fentanyl has become so prevalent, has become really cheap. So we may see a rise in that coming. And they don't just move across our border. they try to get things to the second largest market in the world. We're the largest drug market in the world. Try to get into the EU, and they move that from the Western Hemisphere over to Africa and up into Europe that way.
Yeah, and this is the Chinese are sending the precursors for fentanyl over to Mexico, right?
It's a finished product, but they don't just send it
Yeah.
to Mexico. Mexico is one of the places they send precursors and finished product. The U.S., largely in the Bay Area, San Francisco is the second area where they move things in, both finished product and precursors. The third place they move it is into Canada, largely through Vancouver, and they distribute through Canada and then down into the U.S. And there's a new emerging market coming where the Indians are getting into the game. So they're moving precursors and finished products from India into Mexico.
If people have been watching the show, John, they've heard me talk about this, and they heard me talk about it because I read your small word journals, articles, and these other articles that I think you did some testimony to the congressional folks, some written testimony. I cherry picked that. And so Martine, can you put up the DEA intelligence report and then the Brookings thing? And I think we're close to a break. How much time do I have?
I think it's better for after the break.
Okay, let's go to the break, and then we'll come back with the DEA reports.
Hi guys, this is Gary from Pop Culture Minefield here on KGRA, and we're leaving for our first break. I hope we survive.
Did you know 75% of Americans are chronically dehydrated? If you struggle with focus, run low on energy, or when it's time to finally sleep, you simply can't, this can all be linked to dehydration, and Fuel Up has the answer. Our proprietary formula contains the finest cellular hydration with the strongest immune-enhancing natural ingredients. The Fuel Up system is made up of 3 different incredibly tasting varieties. Wake kickstarts your day with a jolt of caffeine. Play boosts focus while hydrating your cells. Rest not only helps you relax, but also rejuvenates your cells while you sleep. Here's what our clients have to say.
I really don't miss my coffee, and you can tell the difference.
So I'm going to take it for the energy. I'm going to take it for the play. I'm going to take it, all day.
And it works. That's the thing. It works. We love it.
Take the Fuel Up Challenge now, where we offer a Feel the Difference money-back guarantee. Fuel Up for life.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
Oh wow, we survived. Welcome back to the commercial break. Now for some more Pop Culture Minefield on KGRA.
Welcome back to Morning Coffee with the Chief. We have a couple of guests, Dr. John Sullivan and Chief Matt Rodriguez, and we're going over to the movie No Country for Old Men. Martine, can you put the intelligence report from the DEA and then follow that up with the Brookings ones just 30 seconds later? And I pulled this up just to show that we've been dealing with this as Dr. Sullivan has said, we've been dealing with this for a long time. And it talks about what's going on around the country with narcotics smuggling. And Dr. Sullivan has laid that out as well. So this is stuff that we've been dealing with for a very long time. I don't think I've ever seen where we had over 100,000 overdoses. That's what we had in 2021, from 70,000 from fentanyl, about 30,000 from methamphetamine. So it's just accelerating. And go ahead and put the Brookings Institute one up there. And the reason why I wanted it is most people, we get a lot of information on fentanyl now, and we talked a lot about cocaine, but Mexico has always been, as Dr. Sullivan has pointed out, a place where heroin was produced and shipped up to the United States and probably Canada and maybe overseas as well. And so it's just one more threat that we deal with. Of course, I always put in that caveat: we wouldn't have this problem if people gave up the use of recreational drugs. To mitigate some of the blame to Mexico and some of these other producers, this is really about our consumption of illegal narcotics. You can go ahead and take that down now. And so the data is out there, and I always encourage people to educate themselves about what's going on so they can make informed decisions politically on the border and how tough we should handle it. I do believe we need to have tougher border controls, but I need to speed up a little bit, and I wanted to move on to the scene transponders. Get the getting ready scene where Llewellyn Moss has decided to I'm going to keep the money and I'm going to fight these guys off, and he's got the cartels chasing him. Meaning, I'm assuming it's the people that supply the narcotics who now want the money, and he's also got the original financer, which looks, and that is representative of Anton Chigurh, and then ultimately Woody Harrelson's character Carson, who comes into play here in the next few scenes. So he's getting ready, and he realizes that he's being pursued, and the whole transponder thing just hit me because it's low tech technology that probably was big tech back then, right? These transponder with the money, and Dr. Sullivan's been talking about all the new technology. We're talking about drones now, right? But he eventually finds this transponder, realizes that's how he's being discovered and tracked. Probably a little unbelievable given the size of Texas that you would believe that they were able to narrow it down and find him. But he sends his wife off to El Paso to try and protect her from these people that are pursuing him. What'd you think of the whole transponder scene, Matt?
Well, I thought it was interesting because he when he goes through the bag and finds the transponder and realizes, okay, now I know why this guy is after me. And then the whole Woody Harrelson. Woody Harrelson, I think, is like a bounty hunter or something. And he's, later on tells him, hey, look, you're dealing with the wrong guy. This guy's bad news, this sugar guy. But I think that the transponder was just added to the drama of the movie and more suspense. And it was well done. And that now he knows he's being hunted and they know where he's at. So at this point, he goes into a defensive posture. And now he's just trying to hang on for dear life. He got involved, and in reality, he was in over his head at that point. Probably would have been better off leaving the $2 million in the desert. But at this point, now he's become the hunted, and he's in pretty deep.
And we're going to get into the hotel scene pretty soon, though, John. But what do you think of that? Probably back in 1980, a transponder was cutting edge, right? Now it's decidedly low tech, but we look at what they got going on now. When you got big money, transnational criminal organizations can use big money technology, right?
Well, yeah, except it does right now. That transponder is almost archaic. You get a transponder now the size of a hearing aid battery. You get a camera the size of a hearing aid battery, and cartels do use high tech. I'll give you an example. The Zetas and the Gulf Cartel both pioneered the use of their own microwave radio networks. The Zetas, for example, which were originally an enforcer crew for the Gulf Cartel that split and became incredibly violent, built their own microwave relay towers from the U.S.-Mexico border as far south as Veracruz to communicate among each other. They use pole cameras. In Sinaloa, where they in Culiacan, twice now, when the Mexican police and military went in to arrest the sons of El Chapo Guzman, the cartels were monitoring the enforcement activity from their own pole cameras and using their own radio networks. Cartels use.
I think most people don't understand, but to actually build a microwave network takes tens of millions of dollars. I mean, the equipment, and let alone the expertise. Because they got to find somebody they got to pay for the experts to then run it. Because these guys that are working on farms and become soldados, they're not going to run it. It's going to be, people with education.
Yeah, but they have ample money to purchase what they need. They use, software. They use mapping technology. They're building their own. I mean, some of the early narco, tanks look very primitive. In fact, I just cruising through the news, see the Mexican security services rolled up another 14 narco tanks just yesterday to show that this stuff's ongoing. They have factories that build them now. They get more sophisticated over time. Their weaponization.
I did the movie Sicario, and Ralph Ornelas was on for Sicario. He says hello, by the way. I told him I was going to have you on, and he talked about a submarine on the backside of Canalita Island. So technology is increasing. Let's go into the next scene. How dangerous is he? And this is Woody Harrelson's character Carson is in the hospital. Llewellyn has been shot. I guess I got. No, this is how dangerous is he? He's meeting with the people who hired Chigurh, the businessman who hired Chigurh, and basically he says he's a psychopath. That's who he is. He's crazy. You hired, because he says, hey, I got a loose cannon on loose to Chigurh. Can you get the money for me? Because I'm afraid I'm not going to get my money back. As soon as he hires Carson, he puts a target on his back, right? So Matt, how dangerous is this guy? Sometimes when you're in this criminal environment, you don't really know who you're dealing with half the time, right? Or what they're capable of.
Oh yeah, I have no doubt that Chigurh would have never returned the $2 million. He's not going to sprout a conscience all of a sudden, right? He's a cold-blooded killer, and he's after that $2 million, and he's hell-bent on getting it, and I'm sure he was going to disappear with it. But Woody Harrelson, as John said earlier, played a great part in this because he shed a lot of light on this character. It was obvious they knew each other. They knew each other from the past, and he knew how sick he really is. And again, great work by the production of this, the producers of this movie, because they just kept adding to the suspense. It was like this incremental step upward of suspense and in a lot of ways twisted material.
John, I want to go ahead and go right into the hotel scene, because I want to ask you both about the hotel scene. After this scene, go ahead and go right into the hotel scene. So Woody Harrelson's hired, right? He's going to go after this guy, but Chigurh knows where Llewellyn is because of the transponder, and he figures out what hotel he's in. He's checked into a hotel on the U.S. side of the border, and Chigurh knows where he's at. He's going to go at him. But what is really amazing about this scene, John, and I'm going to take you a little bit out of your comfort zone and just talk about the movie making here, right? The suspense that builds this scene up. He checks in, Llewellyn checks in. He knows he's being followed, and he tells him, hey, if anybody else checks in, he tells the desk clerk, give me a call. And then suddenly somebody shows up at his door, and he knows that he didn't get that phone call, and he realizes he's probably been located, right? So the suspense of this scene from the time he checks in until he bails out, and then the gun battle, you just talk to that for a minute. What'd you think of the movie making here?
Well, no, I think the actual cinematography was excellent. Lighting is excellent. I think the movie making, technically was great. I think the writing was really good. And I should acknowledge that the author of the screenplay and the original book just passed away last week. When I saw it on the news. But very well. The novel this comes from was originally designed to become a screenplay. It became a screenplay. It won the Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay because it first came out as a novel. I think solid. Is it how it would really work in real life? No, but does it give you a feel of, because these are all composites in a lot of ways of other criminal activity. Criminals do this, cartels do this. The police are realistic for that time period and that region. I would watch it again. It was very.
Had you watched it before I asked you to watch it?
No, I hadn't. And I don't know how I missed it, because I've seen some of the Coen brothers' other films, and they're great filmmakers. I mean, definitely up there in the pantheon of contemporary movie masters. But this was very good. I sat there just a couple of days ago, watching it with my son and a colleague that I was doing a security assessment with, and we enjoyed it.
Pat, I want
yeah.
to say something now,
Yeah.
just real quick. I actually was on the phone last night with my oldest daughter, and she's up in Seattle, and I told her, yeah, I'm watching this movie. She goes, oh yeah, Dad, I read that book. They made us read that book in school. And she knew about it, and I hadn't. It totally escaped me. But the one thing I will say, and then again, like I said, I researched the movie afterwards and found out it's, well, Cannes Film Festival and, Academy Awards and all this stuff. And I was like, wow, where was I in 2007? Because I missed this, right? But the one thing I was going to say about the Coen brothers is the story is not anything novel. I mean, it's just a story, right? The guy runs across money. He's living in the southwest border town, and it's not some like real intricate, elaborate story, but it's the way the movie's made. And I'm convinced that these Coen brothers, regardless of the story we give them, they can make a movie like this because it's all about the cinematography and the drama that they added to it. It's not so much the storyline.
Well, I did a show together, Matt, called The Incident. And do you remember what you said to me at the time? That when a movie captures you and gets your emotion going, and you say, and you start getting involved in identifying with the character. John, I don't know if you know that The Incident was a show where a couple thugs on a New York subway train were terrorizing folks. You probably remember the movie with Martin Sheen, and he was one of the bad guys. But Matt did that show for me, and Matt said the tension on there just drew him in. Did you feel the same way about this particular scene?
Yeah, the guy was creepy. I'm glad I was watching it in the daytime. But yeah, I did. There was a lot of suspense, and I just told you that day that's the measure of a movie for me, whether it draws you in from. I've never been a fan of like Halloween and those kind of scary movies, but the emotional movies, the one that motivates you to get fired up to go play football, or the movie that holds your suspense, and that's what this one did.
So, John, there's a shootout as Shigur figures out where he's at, and I want to just ask you a little bit about the shootout, right? So, see, Llewellyn Moss figures out, okay. He's here, and he manages to get out. I think the window. He jumps out, and he goes back through the hotel to see what's going on, and then goes out the back door, right? And then he gets shot as he's running away. But and they got silencers. I mean, it's really suspenseful. I mean, this is just as terrifying as the hotel scene, but now you got bullets flying, right? But now, this is where the Hunter and the Marine come in here, and I know you write for Small Wars Journal, so I kind of wanted to ask this question. So he's hit, he knows he's hit, and he goes to try and set up the hitman, right? So this isn't he realizes I have to now set him up. So he goes to a particular area. The blood trail takes him there. So because he gets in a truck, and the guy Shigur kills the driver of the truck crashes, and he then goes across the street and he tries to set up Anton Shigur, right? And he doesn't manage to shoot him. What you think? That is classic counterattack kind of thinking. It's one person, one-on-one in this situation. Did you feel that way when you saw that? Clearly, this guy knows how to hunt and he knows what he's doing.
Well, sure. Because, I mean, the one decisive factor, and we mentioned violence, cartels against public safety personnel. The one thing that allows you to survive the ambush or the attack is counterattack. That's the only, you have to repel, a nice way to say it is repel the force, but the answer is counterattack, return fire. That's a solid tactic. It works. It's one that unfortunately we don't train enough cops on this side of the border. And especially when you get away from large cities where we have more action. I think that's realistic. I think where it starts, these guys were amazingly resilient, and they were both clearly in good physical condition, because to survive those that penetrating trauma and that blood loss, because Moss goes over, cross border, right, after being,
after being shot,
Yeah, and Shigor there is like sewing himself up and giving himself surgery to fix his stuff. That it's not beyond the realm of possibility, but you're talking highly trained, highly motivated, highly mentally focused special operators, and that may be the exception. But you got to remember, some of the like I mentioned the Zetas before, and they're no longer the big deal they were. They've broken up into a couple of factions, but they're still somewhat extant across the border. But a lot of those original Zetas were members of Mexican Special Forces and received Special Forces training. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. It's just generally usually you watch the movies, one shot the guy's down. We know that's not the case, but it can be. For somebody to be that resilient after being shot is not typical. It's the outlier, but it makes a really good statement, because the underlying theme to all this is the battle between good and evil.
Yes.
Right. And the ambiguity of the battle between good and evil. Right.
Yes.
And that made it very realistic.
Well, I think that the whole thing on Llewellyn Moss, because they do play up the fact that he was a Marine that fought in Vietnam, or was at least in Vietnam. They don't say whether he fought, but my assumption is his lack of reaction to the bloodbath and in the desert there, where he really wasn't put off by all those bodies. That he probably had seen a lot of this before. He probably had experienced combat, and he knew like you said, he knew what he had to do, and he had been trained by the military, and he did just that. And at least it delayed his death. He wasn't killed by Chigurh eventually, but I just thought the whole scene from the hotel all the way until they finally break off contact, because he ends up tries to go after Chigurh, knowing that he's hurt, and then Chigurh has disappeared. He lost his gun. He disappeared right in the whole shooting. So, what do you think of the shooting scene, Matt?
Oh, I think Chigurh, having that elaborate weapon that he had, which was some air-powered rifle of some sort that with a huge silencer that was 10 inches long and the size of a soup can. It was just interesting. It made me wonder, and I think they purposely did this. You got to wonder about the background of Chigurh, right? Okay. Mm-hmm. He's doing self-surgery, like John said, using lidocaine and numbing himself up and pulling pellets out of his leg, making sure that he's not infected. So he's a tough guy. He's a smart guy, and he's a psychopath. So it just sort of makes you wonder about his background. But I did see that one of the criticisms of the movie actually was that they didn't progress Chigurh in terms of a character. He was just a psychopath all the way from start to finish, and that was just one of the criticisms of it. But he ends up winning the Academy Award for his performance. But yeah, I thought the shooting scene was wild.
Yeah, and that's we should bring up one of these subjects. I didn't even think of this, John, until now when Matt talked about the weapon. But these guys have whatever firearms they want, right? I mean, they just buy whatever they want. They got plenty of money, just like we talk about the technology.
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously the AK-47 and AR-15 are top of the hit parade. They use Barrett guns, 50 caliber rifles that are capable of taking down helicopters. They are able to buy whatever they need. I think the interesting thing with that nail gun, which was basically used to put down cattle before they slaughter them, which that was used to tie it into the local terrain, to tie it back into history, the continuity, because Texas is the land of cattle, right?
Yeah.
And it was there to provide the continuity to the past, the present, and into the future. Would somebody realistically walk around carrying that canister? Maybe yes, maybe no. I think the interesting thing was the medical examiner had a hard time figuring out what it was, initially, because the device is used to euthanize animals, so it was hard to determine. Would you actually, if I saw that guy walking up to my front door with that thing in that bacon scare, I think I'd have a shotgun in hand before he came in. But you know,
I think it just added to the sophistication of the character.
But you know,
well, yeah, I think it also created fear because nobody knew what that was. It took a long time before. I mean, I knew that that's what it was used for. It was used to kill slaughter pigs and cattle and things like that, and probably other uses. But through my readings or other things that I've done, but most people don't, and it just adds to the fear, right? What the heck is that?
I didn't know what it was. I mean, like the deputy said, it looked like an emphysema tank, right?
Yeah.
But you know, I think that's the theme of the movie because they don't go real in depth to anything. They give a little bit of a shootout. They paint a picture. It's like an impressionist painting. Like Chigurh, they don't develop the character because he's an archetype of evil.
Yes.
You know, I mean, there's not much more to develop. He's just pure raw evil. And I know all three of us have seen that in real life. You know, we don't like to dwell there. You know, but over our collective 150 or so years of policing, we've certainly seen people like that. Thank God we don't see them every day.
I know. Well, let's go on to the next scene. And this is Woody Harrelson. He's already met with the guy that's hired him, and now he tracks down Llewellyn Moss, Josh Brolin in the hospital in Mexico. Josh, after being shot, managed to get over to Mexico. He got rid of the transponder, dumped the money over the bridge, where he feels he can retrieve it when he's healthier. And he goes across the border, and some Mexican musicians realize how badly he's hurt and take him to the hospital. And he wakes up, and Carson, that's what he handles. Carson is there, and he tells him the situation he's in. And you know what I really. There isn't a lot of conversation in this movie, right? And so there's one of the most conversations, and this guy has had interactions with Josh Brolin's had interactions with one assassin, Chigurh, and now he's talking with Carson, and he just makes this comment. Well, Chigurh. Well, I know that Chigurh doesn't talk as much as you. So these guys are really, you know what I mean? I thought, oh my God, that'd be the last thing I'd be worried about. And he doesn't. I don't need any more. I don't care who he is. I'm going to survive this. But I just like the scene because actually Woody Harrelson, even though he's probably a killer himself, he presents as probably the most reasonable of these three. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I like this character, and like I said, because he has so much knowledge of Chigurh, he's trying to tip this guy off and say, "Hey, look, man, throw in the towel. You're in over your head, and it doesn't even matter at this point. You've already annoyed Chigurh. He's probably going to kill you anyway. Just because of that you put him through all of this. So I think it's a great scene, and it gives this guy a moment to ponder. Like, okay, but again, like you said, he's a Vietnam veteran and a warrior himself, and he's at this point ready to fight. But I think the writing's on the wall. He's on his back in the hospital, being told he's going to be killed.
And what I get from Carson in this scene is he's negotiating, right? Chigurh doesn't really. Well, he does negotiate, flips a coin, but it's really not a negotiation. And Woody Harrelson, obviously, he's negotiated deals before, and that's what he's trying to do here. And he actually tries to do that with Chigurh in the next scene that I want to bring up. And Martin, go right into that scene. When this scene is done, go right into the scene with Carson versus Chigurh. Carson versus Anton, because he also tries to negotiate there, right? And John, I really wanted to talk to you about this. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to negotiate, right? And you negotiate from strength, and you negotiate from weakness, but you are dealing. It really isn't the best tactic with Chigurh, right? And it clearly isn't the best tactic with Josh Brolin. But that's what he's doing here in both of these scenes. He's trying to negotiate a successful outcome. He ends up not getting the money from Josh Brolin, and he ends up losing his life in the next scene. What do you think of that?
Well, you negotiate with what you got because you're in a situation you can't get out. I think in a way that was, designed to show the complexity and almost the futility, if you will, and the continuity of violence, that you can't really get out of it, that it's there, it's always there. Even Shigure himself talks about, the coin always being there, that choice is always there. So I think it's just designed to show the timeless nature of the battle or the competition between opposing forces, which is
Pat, the other
Yeah.
thing about this is they almost paint a picture as if he's a good guy, right?
Yeah.
It's like good versus evil, but is he really good? Stumbled upon a crime scene and takes the money, which shows that there's probably some greed involved. But the movie it paints a picture that he's is good versus evil. But who's good here?
But Matt, I mean, we've seen this before though. Sometimes gangsters, bad guys, can do good things. Sometimes good guys can do bad things.
Right.
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen that.
Absolutely.
Without going into the cases, we've investigated things just like that.
Well,
so
it's just
showing how humans.
It's a message of temptation and a good guy, Vietnam vet. His wife was wholesome. Looks like he was, doing his best to make ends meet, and then he stumbles across this money and gets tempted by it, and greed sets in. And like you said, a good guy does something bad. Next thing you know, that. But my point was, the only good guys in this movie really are the lawmen. But you almost want this guy to be victorious over Sugar. And my point is, they both had their faults.
Yeah, even to the point where they dress Shigure in mostly dark, and Woody Harrelson's is kind of a light looking look there. That's almost a white hat, not quite white, maybe a little cream or. But yeah, I see what you're saying, and then Llewellyn, yeah, I think what they call it, the anti-hero. So he's really a hero because he's fighting this evil guy, but he's fighting him for his benefit, not necessarily
right.
for
That's
the overall good, right?
I'm actually referring to Llewellyn. It's like when you really look at Llewellyn versus Sugar, you're like, oh, you're rooting for Llewellyn, right? But you got to think a little deeper into why is he in this place in the first place? Why is he in this position?
Yeah, and so we've rolled into the scene where Woody Harrelson is now confronted by Anton Chigurh. So these are two hired guns now confronting each other, and Harrelson is on the wrong end of this gun that Chigurh has, and he tries to negotiate this out. But these are two competitors in a kind of a game theory situation, right? A game, they're both trying to achieve a goal. And John, I learned a lot about the game theory from you. And when I look at these things, it is a big game that's going on. And when I say a game, and I'm not saying a fun game, it is just two actors. These would be non-traditional, irregular actors trying to achieve a goal. And Woody Harrelson's about to lose in this game. What do you think?
No, I think there's definitely the competition between opposing forces, which, here is playing at multiple levels. It's playing between the forces of good and evil, clearly. It's between law enforcement and the gangsters. It's gangster versus gangster, which, again, that's not atypical, maybe not as artistically framed and neatly packaged as this, but there's multiple simultaneous games being played. And you're right, they're not games in the sense of, what we think of something for fun, but they're a competitive endeavor. And I think the interesting thing beyond the movie, where it does really well, is you can model those types of behavior. You can develop algorithms to predict how activities occur. In fact, I worked on a project where we took the heuristic knowledge I had from field work, interviewing gangsters, looking at intelligence reports and patterns, and developed an algorithm that was able to successfully predict where a cartel was going to conduct its next operation and hit it. I mean, those are the type of things that we're seeing happening now with AI. And I think we're going to increasingly see machine learning capturing the knowledge that individual, like right now we have 3, long-term cops retired. In the past, that knowledge would go away. We can have machine learning capture it, learn from it, and provide insight, which in the movie actually occurs when Ed Tom, the sheriff, goes back and talks to his Uncle Ellis, right? And he points out that this is what lawmen do, and this ambiguity isn't new. This is what lawmen have always done. They may be a new wrinkle with new technology. We may have revolvers instead of wheel guns, right? We may have computers and AI, but the struggle continues. So I think game theory and how you can apply that to decision support at tactical, operational, and strategic levels is something that we're going to see more of. It's going to become exploited. The question is, and it's the question that occurs here, how valid is the information? Who do you trust? Whom do you trust? Can you trust? And do trust betray? I mean, I think the one interesting thing to zoom back to the Woody Harrelson character getting up there talking to the business people who are going to get their things, and they're like white collar looking people. Not all of these organized crime enterprises look like gangsters and sicarios. There's deep penetration. We're talking about the violence because violence is interesting. Most people, when they talk about Mexican cartels and cross-border incidents, talk about violence because they're notable. And I'm not saying this violence doesn't occur; it does. But the real threat to the solvency of a state, either Mexico, the United States, or name any, is when insecurity and overwhelms public trust, and the government doesn't have capacity to deal with it. Like Los Angeles, do we have some drug violence? Yes. Have we seen assassination-style murders related to drug cartels? Obviously. Chapo Guzman's wife had her child in Lancaster, right? But the real interesting things on the money laundering side, because people aren't just moving drugs for the hell of moving drugs, and they ain't just killing people for the hell of killing people, except for the guys that go crazy. And that certainly, to be able to do that level of violence, you have to have some kind of mental defect, I suspect. But money laundering, trade-based money laundering, Los Angeles is a hub of money laundering activity. It's not the only hub. Large banks, you name them, them, are engaged in that type of trade. And how many cops know how to do financial crimes? Because if you're going to take apart the cartel, you're not going to do it kinetically.
Because we don't, all the crimes we do, the Part 1 crimes are the ones we focus on because that's the measure of criminality. And we did, when in the movie Sicario, we got into the, I think the people that are laundering money for these drug cartels are just as evil and just as part of that conspiracy and killing people as anybody else. And we as street cops, we focus ourselves on where the violence occurs the most because that's what gets the most attention. But yeah, you're right. The consumption of narcotics is inspiring the smuggling, and then the laundering, the profit from the laundering of money inspires other people, white collar criminals, to get involved. And I think they're all these guys are all evil because not everybody goes into using drugs. I mean, they sell it. The fact that they're giving fentanyl to kids disguised as something else is to get them addicted, and they really don't care if they kill anybody. The fact that they're putting fentanyl in, mixing it in with cocaine and methamphetamine, which also leads to overdoses, but it's really to get them addicted to that stuff. These guys are evil. They don't care that they do this, and the people that launder their money are also evil. Matt, you ran for office. What do you think of that?
Well, yeah, no, I think that it's far-reaching. Like you said, they're just supporters of illicit, criminal behavior. People that are laundering money, they're part of the problem. They just contribute to the problem. They have blood on their hands, as far as I'm concerned. And those people need to be held accountable, prosecuted, and sent to prison.
So in the movie, so we're going to get back to the movie here. So Llewellyn is healed, reasonably so, and he now knows. He's had a conversation with Shigor. Shigor knows that his wife is in El Paso, and he's going to El Paso. And he says, "I'm going to kill your wife if you don't give me the money. I'm going to kill you no matter what. But if you give me the money, your wife can survive." And so he's heading off to El Paso to protect his wife. And you can see in the movie there is a bond. Llewellyn and Brolin, Llewellyn's character, his character, and his wife, they do love each other. You can see that. But he's clearly the old style guy. He's in charge. He's going to do this, and he realizes his wife is not safe. And of course, this is probably what sets him apart from everybody else. This is where he's got the white hat on, conveniently, and he's going to El Paso to hide the money because he's retrieved the money, but also protect his wife. And there's a shootout there, and he's probably focused more on the assassin, and he has not realized that the Mexican drug cartels have also figured out where he's at or where he's going to be, and they're laying in wait for him in El Paso to get the money, and he's killed. And so it's not unusual to have multiple partners going after this thing of value, right, John? So he's looking at one enemy, and another enemy takes him out to get the money, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, beyond the artifice of capturing the money, the violence in Mexico isn't just random. The drug violence isn't just random. It's usually one cartel versus another cartel, or one faction of a cartel seeking to take over a plaza. A plaza is shorthand for the key piece of terrain that drugs and all criminal activity travels through. And the cartel that owns the plaza takes tribute from the other criminal enterprises that operate there. You can move through my plaza if you pay the quota. So in a way, it's kind of medieval political organization. But yeah, there's multiple players, factions vying. A cartel itself is not necessarily one single gang. Some are more hierarchical and tightly coupled. Others are more kind of broadly distributed lateral networks. They're all networks of one type or another, but some are more tightly controlled. So, yeah, it's really.
I have to tell you, one of the things I miss about working with guys like John and developing cool ways to solve old problems. Because, nothing against our law enforcement brethren, but lots of times ideas like this will go over people's head, and they don't want to even approach it because they don't know how to implement approach to a game theory kind of strategy for dealing with law enforcement or something like that. And I miss those kinds of things with both John and Matt. So I'm really happy to have them both on the show. Matt, I know you've got a limited time. You're going to leave a little early. John, you'll stick around to the end. But I want to ask, and this is more about a movie thing on this thing. So this is what sets Shigor apart from Llewellyn, right? Is he's going to go back and protect his wife. He loves his wife. He cares about wife. He's going to go back. He knows going back is not the best for him. He's got the money, but he loves his wife. He's going to go back and protect his family. And this is where the anti-hero, the hero part of that anti-hero comes out, because he's stealing this money, yes, for himself, but also for his family and for his wife that he loves. I think that this scene indicates who really Llewellyn Moss is. What do you think?
Oh, yeah. Well, Pat, do you remember they prefaced it a little bit by the girl by the pool flirting with him?
Yeah.
He was trying to tempt him to, obviously go have a liaison with her, right? And he says, "No, I'm waiting on my wife." And so that, I think that just further, accentuated, the good guy aspect.
Yeah, and and that's the other thing about that scene is she also was killed. The lady that flirted with him was killed, right? So there's collateral damage in these shootings, then and today, right, John? So we see a lot of innocent people get killed in collateral in these gunfights with cartels or whoever.
No, there's certainly unintended consequence. I mean, obviously, we on the police side ethically seek to minimize that or try to operate without doing that. The cartels and gangs that are engaged in the criminal activity generally don't. Although there are some of the cartels start to realize that they need to legitimately the communities they serve and try to protect the civilians. They're not necessarily the highest well-trained operators out there doing the activity. So it's a mixed bag, but armed combat always is.
I in the movie Sicario that I did with Ralph Ornelas, they had if you haven't seen the movie, as they're leaving Juarez, they realize they're going to probably get hit at the border, and there's some street gang members that are there, in my opinion, to create a distraction so somebody can then assassinate the person that they've just taken out of Juarez, the brother of the drug lord kind of thing. And there is an interplay between street gangs and these transnational criminal organizations in Mexico. They're soldados or they're soldiers and things like that. And they're not really worried at this point about collateral damage. Because these are not really super sophisticated guys. And before I get your comments on that, I know Matt's only got a couple minutes, but I want to jump ahead on ask about a scene. Now you did the show High Noon with me, Matt, right?
Yes.
And when Sheriff Bell goes and talks to his uncle, it just reminded me so much of when Marshall Kane goes and talks to, I think it was Lon Chaney was the actor. I forget the name of the character. And I mean, Lon Chaney is kind of crippled up and he's sitting in the chair asking for advice. And so Kane's asking him, and Sheriff Bell goes and talks to his uncle. Same kind of scene. It almost was inspired by High Noon. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think it just he started talking about his own age and that he was feeling older, he was slowing down. And look, let's just be realistic here. We always said this, patrol was a young man's game. And it happened to me, it happened to all of us, where at some point where hey, I lost a step. And I remember the first time I was in a foot pursuit and I lost the guy. It was very clear to me that, hey, and that was only like 4 years in. I was like, whoa, I would have got that guy 2 years ago.
I was chasing this guy and I was the sergeant, so I shouldn't have been chasing anybody, but and I couldn't jump the fence. I had to find the gate.
That happened to me in Ladera Heights. I had a 16-year-old kid leap the fence, and I couldn't get over the fence because it was leaning inward. And then later on, when I went into the projects, they were laughing at me, and I said, "Well, don't worry, I'll catch him. I'll get him." But no, we come from law enforcement families, and it's generational. And the reality of it is, and John, you're an expert in this, and that new level of sophistication moving into that part of the country was overwhelming for those law enforcement officers that were just used to, Mayberry type activity. And all of a sudden now you got, automatic gunfire and high calibers and violence. So, we've all seen it. We experienced it, and you pass the baton on to the younger, more equipped men and women who do the job every day. And I just want to say this one thing, Pat, because you do know I got to cut out. I got a meeting with an architect related to my project over here in Arcadia, but I just wanted to say, I worked with a lot of good partners and a lot of good people in law enforcement and in government after my sheriff's department career. But there's nobody that's been top tier like you two. And, the reason I really enjoyed it, everything that we did throughout our careers was kind of based on best practices and an evolution of law enforcement technique and tactics. But with you guys, it was always an academic approach on top of that. So I always felt like, John, I admire you greatly. I love you, brother. It's always like the professor speaking to the student. And I knew going in today, that's what it was going to be like, because this is his field of study and his expertise. So I really enjoyed it. John, I always enjoy talking to you and listening to you. Pat, immense respect for you as well. And again, I just took the nuggets of academia that I learned from the two of you, applied it to our law enforcement as another layer. And we drew upon a lot of success by doing that. And I want to just, again, remind you guys of the great times that we had. And, it's not over. We're brothers for life. So thank you.
Well, Matt, thanks for coming on. I know you got to go. And I did want to say, of the three of us on here, Matt's got 2 master's degrees. John's he's up to a PhD. I forget how many. I'm just got the lowly bachelor's degree. But you know what? I know how to listen to you guys, and I know how to implement based upon what you guys say. And I think that's why we made a really good team. And I was always, I tell people, to be successful, you can't be afraid. And I was never afraid to try something new, which allowed me to be successful. Because people say, how were you successful? Well, I was willing to do other things people wouldn't even try, because too many people take the safe road. Bureaucrats that is.
Yeah, and I think also one of the things I learned in leadership courses, you got to be a courageous follower. And I don't need to be the guy out in front, and I do want to be a courageous follower who learns and listens, and and then you got to have a brave heart in order to be successful and apply new things. And we did that in transit. We don't have time to get into it today, but we know what we did, and we knew how our level of success as well. So thank you guys again. It's great seeing you. And we'll see you on another episode, Pat.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Matt. We'll bring this team together for another movie in the future.
You got it.
Okay?
Take care. We'll be in touch.
Buddy.
Okay.
See you, Matt.
See you, John. Ribeye. Remember that.
Definitely.
See you guys.
Bye-bye. So John, so let's back up, because I wanted to go back. So after Llewellyn is killed and Sheriff Bell gets there, and of course he's disappointed. He wanted to save Llewellyn, and it's such a small county, he probably knows everybody, right? So he feels this the pain of failure probably more so than a lot of us who we deal with a lot of strangers who pass away. I mean, we still feel it, but it's different when you know a person, right? Or of a person, and you're the person responsible. In fact, I think the most emotion I had when I dealt with is when I was actually like a sergeant or lieutenant. I was responsible for people and they got shot. It made me feel so much worse than if I was just working with a partner and you got shot. You still feel the guilt and the survivor's guilt, but it's amplified when you're responsible. So he feels that way, but he meets with the local law enforcement, the El Paso, either a homicide investigator or detective or whoever the big guy is in that scene. And they discuss, and it's all about money and drugs. That's what they're dealing with. That's their biggest violence. It's all about money and drugs. And that's what criminal enterprise is. It's about money. Drugs is just a way to get money. And you've also laid out that for these transnational criminal organizations or these Mexican drug cartels or these cartels in Mexico, it isn't just about drugs. It's about every possible way to get money. And it is all about the almighty dollar and getting it as quickly and as easily as possible, right?
Oh, absolutely. And, drugs are a big line of business. Extortion is as important. You have to pay to play. If you're in the community, I did talk to business leaders in El Paso and in Tijuana, and they all knew that the cartels were there. They all knew that they had to pay the tithe, if you will, pay the quota to be able to successfully run their business. The cartels are polycrime organizations. They interact with others. They create alliances. They rely on a number of brokers to be able to launder money, to bring them technical capability. We talked a little bit about drones. Well, drones aren't just aerial drones. You mentioned narco subs. Well, uncrewed subsurface or low-profile vehicles, or known as narco subs, are a big business. In fact, there are transoceanic, transatlantic narco subs. They're semi-autonomous. They program them with GPS. They move them from South America over to Africa, from Africa into Spain. There's a specialty cartel in Spain that manufactures uncrewed, low-profile surface vehicles to be able to move the drugs. There are similar cartels that move larger profile, the little small DJI Mavic drones. Those are ubiquitous. they're weaponizing those. There's some larger platform drones that can actually carry a real payload that you can use to smuggle or, at some point in the future, weaponize. And I know they're being used in the Ukrainian theater of operations. So that'll grow. Yeah, it's all about money. Tangentially, it's about power. When I talk about criminal insurgency, I'm not talking about the cartel taking over the government. I'm talking about the cartel changing the government. The few times cartels, if you go back to the early days of the Medellin cartel in Colombia, when they tried to take over the government, the state react boldly and cut that out. Then the cartels in Colombia found, well, hey, maybe we'll just buy the government. We'll buy the ability to maneuver. And that's the predominant. What we're seeing now in Mexico is a combination of the two tactics, using violence, using corruption to further their aims. But that relies upon corrupt politicians and corrupt cops. If you didn't have corrupt politicians and corrupt cops, you couldn't, get that foothold. The problem
let's bring up the scene you're quitting, and that'll roll in the background. But I still want to build on the theme, John, because some people might say, well, this is an anti-Mexican show you're talking about. Not really. I mean, John's from New York. You had the 5 families there, John, right? They corrupted government. They engaged in criminal activity for a long time, and we're talking La Cosa Nostra. They still do, and that went on for a few hundred years, right? A couple hundred years at least, and organized crime is organized crime, right?
I'll be equal opportunity. The Irish gangs on the west side, the Westies, were just as ruthless as the Italian 5 families. In fact, they worked with them from time to time. We talk about back in the day, Murder Incorporated and the Jewish mafia. Well, they worked with the Italian mafia too. Organized crime is a global phenomenon. It occurs in every culture, every society. Often when there are immigrant communities, it's the first place people get the opportunity to integrate and move up and through, which has been the normal story. But the Mexican cartels work with lots of other criminal enterprises.
Absolutely. Well, I just wanted to make that statement that this isn't an ethnic thing. This is there are criminal gangs in almost every society. So here's the scene. The scene we're talking about is the sheriff goes back and he visits his uncle, and he's just talking about retirement and lamenting about how things have gotten really dangerous. And his uncle's reminded him, no, it's kind of always been that way. What'd you think of this scene, John?
I think it's absolutely true. It always has been that way. The technology changes, but the continuity is organized crime, criminals, and just violent sociopaths, psychopaths. They've always existed. They always threaten the community, and there's always the need.
Well, it's one of the things you said. We got to wrap up pretty close here. I think I just have one more scene. Martin, how much time do I have?
Like 1 minute.
Okay, just roll right in the next scene. Segura goes on to kill his wife, but I really wanted to address something you said on this scene as well. And that kind of closes out the movie for the most part, and then Bell goes on to retirement. But there's a lot of really smart people heading towards the door because of the anti-police stuff going on, and we lose a lot of that knowledge. And I kind of see the scene. We're losing Ed Bell, who'd been the sheriff in this county for a long time. We're losing that knowledge because he's hung it up. It's one of the reasons why I do the podcast, is I get to talk about our own experiences, obviously the movie, which I like the movies. And then what's going on today. So first of all, what do you think of the scene? And do you think that we're losing a lot of that knowledge because we're not tapping into law enforcement because it's characterized as evil?
I, like you, part of the reason I still consult, still teach, and go out and do things is to pass on that knowledge and place it into a context. Do we lose it? To a degree.
Yeah.
But there is continuity. We do pass it on.
I got to wrap up, John. I want you to stick around after the show so I can debrief with you. I want to remind the folks to watch my show every Tuesday, 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time on Pop Culture Minefield. You can go back on that channel and watch some of my old shows. Next week's show is going to be a great movie called Prince of the City, which I'm sure John has seen, with the great actor Treat Williams, who recently passed away, and I kind of want to honor his legacy with that movie. Martine, I think we are done. You can go ahead and take it away.
Those sons of bitches.
Ma, I'm doing a show.